Today I will show you an activity thrill ride film from 2007, named Shooter. In the Ethiopian desert, expert sharpshooter Sergeant Weave Lee Strutt and his spotter Corporal Donnie Fenn are on a peacekeeping mission. When they deal with the foe vehicle they are hanging around for, they're prepared to leave. However, unexpectedly, an entire multitude of hostiles appears that shouldn't have been there. As the two armed forces open fire, Sway utilizes his noteworthy expert marksman abilities to kill however many adversaries as could be allowed, yet bombs are beginning to detonate around them, so they demand extraction. Sadly, their CIA support group totally disregards them and removes correspondence, bringing about Donnie's demise when a helicopter takes shots at them. Incensed, Bounce discharge back, and subsequent to missing a couple of shots, he figures out how to stir things up around town's propellers and make it crash. After 3 years, Weave is living as a hermit with his K9 in the mountains of Wyoming. One evening, he's drawn nearer by Colonel Isaac Johnson, who has a mission for him, to design the president's death. He mustn't execute it, simply plan it, since they've gotten intel that a death endeavor will happen soon, so they need a specialist to sort out how and where so they can stop it. Weave at first says no, yet prior to leaving, Johnson gives him the data at any rate as he requests to his feeling of obligation. In the wake of testing the distance, the president would be at with his own rifle and pondering it a ton, Bounce concludes he will help. He visits the 3 areas the president will give a discourse at and concentrates on every one of the subtleties until he reaches the resolution that the endeavor will occur in Philadelphia. At the point when he visits Johnson to illuminate him regarding this, Johnson compliments him on nicely done and persuades him to come upon the arrival of the occasion so he can be their spotter. Weave additionally meets Michael Sandor, another previous officer assisting with the activity. Upon the arrival of the occasion, Sway joins Johnson's group in a room sitting above the site, which they set up with the assistance of a nearby cop. At the point when the opportunity arrives for the president to give his discourse after the Ethiopian ecclesiastical overseer, Bounce cautions them that this is the ideal second for shooting and they ought to prevent the president from getting in front of an audience. Nonetheless, they don't pay attention to him. All things considered, the cop takes shots at Bounce as the secretive adversary takes shots at the president. Weave is injured 2 times, however, he figures out how to escape by going through the window and afterward through a structure's unreasonable impediment. While Johnson's group tidies up the room and just abandons Sway's rifle, Weave goes through the roads and runs over FBI specialist Scratch Memphis. Since Scratch is a tenderfoot, it's simple for Bounce to incapacitate him and cuff him to a railing. Then he takes his vehicle keys as he lets him know he didn't make it happen and it was each of an arrangement. The city is immediately taken over by the police and the FBI, who even send helicopters to pursue Bounce. To lose them for some time, Weave enters a car wash and keeping in mind that the vehicle is cleaned, he slices open the secondary lounge to venture into the storage compartment and get a medical aid pack that he uses to manage his injuries temporarily. Subsequently, he returns to the roads, where after a long pursuit, Weave winds up encompassed by cops. Seeing as he has no other decision, he drives the vehicle in opposite and tosses it in the waterway. A couple of seconds after the fact, when the FBI tracks down the vehicle, it's vacant. Bounce has gotten away by hitching a ride on a canal boat. He gets back to arrive on the opposite side of the stream and takes a truck that permits him to drive by security without any issues. In the meantime, Weave's image is showing up all around the news. Scratch's disappointment is likewise being discussed, so his manager illuminates him he'll go through a survey for having humiliated the FBI. Scratch recalls Bounce said it was every one of an arrangement, however his supervisor doesn't trust him and cautions him against putting that on his report. At the point when dusks, Bounce comes by a supermarket, yet just enters it subsequent to removing its power so he can't be perceived in the murkiness. When he has what he wants, he breaks into a specialist shop to take a couple of additional devices and utilize their washroom. There, he utilizes the provisions he purchased to make an ad-lob 4 that he infuses into his arm. Back to Scratch, he's been placed on telephone obligation, and he gets a call from the supermarket representative that thinks the man from prior might have been Weave. Scratch trusts her, perceiving the things Bounce purchased as an old strategy to treat wounds. However, his manager doesn't view him in a serious way when he attempts to report it. Scratch actually doesn't surrender however, and begins investigating every one of the subtleties of the occurrence. It is not right to think something. He goes through the night in his office without dozing, and when his associate Lord Galindo finds him there in the first part of the day, he tells her every one of the hints he's found. Consequently, Lord lets him know that the cop that shot Weave has been viewed as dead, which further affirms Scratch's paranoid fear. Subsequent to masking himself as a technician, Bounce drives for quite a long time until he comes to Kentucky and goes to see Donnie's widow Sarah Fenn. They never talked since Donnie passed on, in spite of the fact that Weave kept in touch with her a letter when it worked out and sends her roses consistently, so Sarah recollects that him. She's additionally seen the information and is vigilant to give him access, yet Sway persuades her he's blameless when he tells her he'd prefer let her shoot him than return. After Sarah illuminates him that the president is fine and it was the Ethiopian ecclesiastical overseer that had chance, Bounce gives her a rundown of provisions she really wants to purchase so she can deal with his injuries. The provisions incorporate a lot of whipped cream jars, from which Weave breathes in the nitrous oxide gas, so he's dropped while Sarah lines him up. Meanwhile, Scratch visits every one of the structures encompassing the region of the occurrence and finds stand blemishes on the floor of an old ringer tower. Then, at that point, he goes to a cybercafe to visit for certain weapons specialists that rapidly enlighten him concerning the remote-controlled rifles that might have been utilized in such a circumstance. At the point when Sway awakens, Sarah lets him know his K9 has been shot since they thought he wasn't returning. Not entirely set in stone to demonstrate his innocence, and he thinks Scratch is the best way to do that, so he makes an arrangement to meet him. Sarah acknowledges to help him, and even gives him Donnie's old hunting rifle. The arrangement is straightforward. Sarah puts on a camouflage and approaches Scratch at a bistro to give him Bounce's vehicle's ID data. That way when Scratch examines the data on the framework, it'll stand out. Sarah executes the arrangement impeccably, yet Bounce, who has been watching from far off, is found by the police requesting an ID. For a prepared warrior like him, it isn't difficult to battle them and even utilize their own K9 against them, so Weave will take them out and take a radio prior to taking off. In the meantime, Scratch really does precisely as Weave anticipated and looks for the vehicle data in the framework, however it's under a degree of freedom he doesn't approach. He asks Lord for help, and after some faltering, she lets him know which case has such leeway and affirms that the broadcasts got tapes of the episode that were vigorously altered. The other piece of Bounce's expectation additionally works out. All of Scratch's sneaking about is seen by Johnson's men, so obviously, they'll deal with it. Scratch is grabbed and beat up for data, yet since he won't talk, the hooligans set up a contraption to shoot him and make it seem as though Scratch did it to himself. Luckily, Scratch is saved without a second to spare by Weave, who kills every one of the hooligans with his rifle from far off prior to coming inside. Scratch offers his assist to do this the legitimate way since he with Kenning demonstrate Weave didn't shoot the diocese supervisor, yet Bounce just needs vengeance and the law can't give him that. It might demonstrate his innocence, however the defiled names will in any case be in power and rehash exactly the same thing in several years. Since Scratch has proactively done what's needed to lose his own employment, he acknowledges to help. While Johnson's men figure out Bounce has sent roses to Sarah consistently and send somebody to grab her so they can involve her as trap, Sway and Scratch drive to Tennessee to meet Mr. Raitt, a guns master. Mr. Raitt educates them concerning a method called paper fixing, which makes it workable for a projectile to be shot from one rifle however made to seem as though it came from another. This is the means by which Johnson outlined Sway. They utilized a round Weave terminated when he did the test prior to tolerating the mission. Mr. Raitt likewise lets him know that the main expert sharpshooter left alive other than Weave that might have pulled such a stunt is Mykolaiv Serbiak, whose depiction rapidly causes Bounce to understand it's Sandor's genuine name. Scratch calls Lord so she can track down data about Sandor's past, and she gets them the area of where to track down him. This is really an arrangement by Johnson, who has requested Sandor to be snare for Bounce. Johnson likewise asks for help from Congressperson Charles Meacham, who needs to see Bounce dead as well. It's late around evening time when Joson's men break into Sarah's home. She figures out how to kill one of them, yet the other one catches her, promising her to live it up together. After they show up at Virginia where Sandor is stowing away, Bounce and Scratch go to a home improvement shop to purchase a lot of provisions they use to make their bombs, since Sway has proactively speculated there's a snare sitting tight for them. He likewise shows Scratch a sharpshooter's essential information so he can help as his spotter. At the point when the opportunity arrives to act, Scratch stays disguised in the brambles while providing Weave with the area of the gatekeepers through the communicator. Individually, Weave takes a large portion of the men out and spreads the bombs they made around the area prior to going into the house. Sandor isn't astounded to see him and acknowledges to make sense of everything. He doesn't have the foggiest idea about Johnson's genuine name, yet he utilized Sandor the same way he utilized Bounce, and he did it to numerous different marksmen as well. Find an injured trooper, appeal to his distinction for a solitary work, then toss him to the side like an old canine. The entire mission has forever been wanted to kill the ecclesiastical overseer, and imagining the shot had been expected for the president is the cover. Scratch trusts her, perceiving the things Bounce purchased concerning a whole town that was cleared out so an oil pipeline could be laid through by an association that takes advantage of financial resources in agricultural nations, run by Meacham and Johnson. This occurred in Ethiopia quite a while back, and that is the way Sway discovers that he accidentally gave Overwatch to that slaughter that day, which is the reason he and Donnie were passed on to bite the dust. As Scratch lets Sway know that warriors have shown up and are encompassing the house, Sandor admits he's been talking just to keep Weave inside while reinforcements showed up. Then, at that point, he reminds Sway that this intrigue runs profound and there isn't only one head to cut. He likewise educates him regarding Johnson having Sarah before he puts a firearm under his jawline to end things in his own particular manner. The warriors then, at that point, start breaking into the house so Bounce fends them off as Scratch actuates the line bombs and the gas. With the smoke as cover, Bounce goes out and keeps on shooting more fighters as he runs into a protected spot. Then Scratch actuates the napalm prior to killing any excess fighters so Sway can escape securely. A helicopter before long shows up at the area, yet after what occurred in Ethiopia, this time Sway is prepared for it. He and Scratch take off so the helicopter can pursue them, and when he flies over the ideal place, Bounce explodes a bomb that lights the helicopter ablaze and makes it crash. The pair figures out how to disappear to Montana, where Scratch calls lured and inspires her to risk him with his chief. Scratch just lets them know he's with Weave and that he can't confide in them prior to hanging up, in light of the fact that this entire visit is an arrangement for Johnson to follow the telephone and call them. Weave offers him an arrangement. He'll get Sarah back and in return, he'll give them Sandor's admission about what occurred in Ethiopia, which he subtly recorded. He additionally requests the trade to be finished with Meacham for additional protection. They consent to meet on a cold mountain. Johnson, Meacham, Sarah and her detainer arrive first. A man out of nowhere seems a couple of steps away and starts moving toward them, so Johnson's secret expert marksmen shoot him and he falls. Yet, this is every one of a stunt. That man is Scratch and he's wearing a piece of metal under his coat so he's fine. He served as an enticement so Sway could find Johnson's expert riflemen and kill them, which is immediately trailed by shooting the hooligan that is keeping Sarah. While the FBI gets a letter from Scratch informing them regarding this experience, Sway moves toward the gathering to do the trade, yet first Scratch makes everybody drop their weapons. Sarah takes one of those firearms to fire the hooligan for how he treated her, and Bounce comforts her before at last conversing with Meacham. However, it's all somewhat silly. Subsequent to extending to Weave an employment opportunity, Meacham reminds him how profound the debasement runs in the framework. Acknowledging how pointless his recording is, Bounce chooses to consume it just before the FBI shows up to capture him. A couple of days after the fact, in Washington, D.C., Bounce is permitted to have a confidential gathering with principal legal officer and other FBI pioneers. Scratch, Sarah and Johnson are there as well. We've had mentioned for the rifle of his that had been found at the location of the crime to be brought, and presently he utilizes it to effectively defend himself. Since Sway trades all of the discharging pins out of his weapons at whatever point he ventures out from home, this rifle can't fire accurately, and Bounce exhibits so by neglecting to shoot at Scratch. The principal legal officer acknowledges this proof and awards Bounce his opportunity. However, he can't acknowledge his allegations against Johnson and Meacham in light of the fact that he needs proof. Scratch cuts in and shows him photos of the slaughter in Ethiopia, yet the head legal officer claims he can't make a meaningful difference with it since it's out of his purview. In a little while, Meacham, Johnson, and their right hand are at the representative's mountain lodge when out of nowhere, Johnson falls dead from a shot and their vehicle outside detonates. It's Sway, who is currently at the entryway shooting the safety officer and afterward the collaborator prior to pursuing Meacham. At the point when the congressperson reminds him, he's important for the USA government, Sway simply answers, precisely, and kills him too. A while later, he places his firearm in Johnson's grasp and breaks the gas pipe, so when he goes out, the structure detonates as well. Bounce in the long run arrives at the street where Sarah is hanging tight for him in a vehicle, so they drive away to begin another coexistence.